what's feeling to me is that I chose to wear my Eagle shirt because, in some ways, that's kind of what we're doing. We're seeing things from a different perspective. Uh,
Yeah.
of course, in the past, but the past really doesn't completely disappear. There's something that affects us for a long, long period of time, or we, not speaking of age, we kind of forget things. And yet, those things that affected a lot of people need to be remembered,
Yes.
really. And I think that's the reason why we are choosing to take time to bring those events that need to be revisited and then given some kind of, well, maybe there is something that can be learned from or remembered about, or even better, maybe there is something that needed to happen. Oh
Mm.
boy,
Yeah.
tough, really tough. That's the reason, even for our personal life, there's things that we kind of closet and things, when actually, as I have recently gone through the experience of, there's parts of things that happen that have really made us who we are as persons,
How true.
I think, as a society. And that's one of the things that I feel like can take place as we make this attempt to revisit and take a look at things. So let's go ahead and get to, okay, well, let me give you a little bit of a touch of each one. And then I'm giving you time to think about what events and happenings had the most impact upon your life at that time. And I too will revisit the 1980s in my personal, but for the sake of the balance of what has been our personal, as well as what has been in the life of many of the people now that's going to be seeing this, even though they might be young people, they can have some sense of some discussion. And certainly what I think we are doing here, it will kind of add to what they were not able to personally experience at the time. Okay, so we will be looking at, and you'll notice that I have some new things, of things that uh, was more that I remembered, and you too. So I have this list of about 9 or 10 things that we can make a part of this 1980s stuff. I hadn't realized until I talked with Mary that there was a significant event caused by Ted Turner. And there, as you can see there, it was the beginning of what might be called cable news, but it was a choice of making news available at all parts of the day, and certainly those who worked at night. And so that, I believe, was the beginning of how news began to be accessible, even though it was kind of complicated because you now had to decide on what news and how much news to offer. And then, of course, President Reagan's being shot, the AIDS issue, and then a new one there that I hadn't fully recovered. I remember our conversation, the Tylenol murders, as the title of that is, and then the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion, and then President Reagan's United Nations talk. You notice that there's a RE because there's some of these things that I'm wanting to kind of give some talk to. And then just a simple conversation that both you and I hadn't realized that because I think the stock market wasn't really a part of our experience back in those days. But for many, that stock market crash was a big, big happening.
Mhm.
Then the topic of Native American boarding school uh, way of dealing with the indigenous people of this land, and the opening of the discussions actually started in Canada of the reports of abuse and the finding of quite a number of unmarked graves, if you will. And then the very end of the 1980s was the fall of the Berlin Wall. I have some things that I'm happy to share regarding that, of not only the event, but actually being in that same year, going to Berlin and visiting the the east side of Berlin. And this gives me a chance to kind of talk about that. Okay. Well, Grandmother Sky,
Yes.
you give a chance to, well, which ones? Yeah. And notice that it's going to be a number of things. I couldn't find just one most important.
Right. Well, one does stand out to me. Several do, but one in particular, because of my work with children.
Yeah.
The Native American boarding school revelations of the abuse that went on in those boarding schools, and the huge number of deaths of children that was hidden. And of course that was bad enough. But in the 80s is when sexual abuse finally came to light. And it was such a hidden issue in our country, but it was pervasive. It was happening all the time.
November marks Native American Heritage Month, a time to recognize all of the contributions the first Americans made to the establishment and the growth of the U.S. It is also a time to reflect on the challenges the community faces. Tonight, we're looking at a dark past in the lives of Native Americans in North America that has been recently uncovered and is drawing renewed focus on the horrific history of Native American boarding schools in the U.S. It's a painful part of American history that often goes untold. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the U.S. established federally funded boarding schools aimed at assimilating hundreds of thousands of Native American children, forcibly taking them from their families and stripping them of their culture.
There was a lot of horrific things that happened to myself, and I know a lot of other individuals that were in that school system.
The horrors laid bare with the discovery last June of 215 unmarked graves outside of an Indigenous children's school in Canada, which had adopted similar policies as the U.S.
We talked when we were in school about some people that went missing, and it was assumed that they ran away and we're never going to come back.
My mother is boarding school survivor.
Kent State adjunct professor Kimberly Medicine Horn Jackson is now part of a research team tasked with uncovering the horrific histories at these schools in the U.S.
And we're running against time. Our elders who went to the boarding schools, they're crossing over daily. And we're losing the truth of what happened.
There were 357 known boarding schools, many operated by Catholic and Protestant churches. Here, Native children were forced to abandon their language, their traditions, and culture.
Was this ethnic cleansing?
According to the Geneva Convention on Genocide, the Native American boarding schools fall into all 10 categories of genocide.
But now, leading the way in the top levels of government.
Now, for the first time, this country has a cabinet secretary who is Indigenous.
Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland launched the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative to investigate the full scope of U.S. policies and their effects.
The removal of history in our books, that's a method of Indian removal.
Speaking the untold truth, only until then can healing begin.
How can we ever heal How can we ever do things differently if we don't take the time to listen to what happened?
And just last week, researchers identified more than 50 Native children who died at a boarding school in Nebraska that closed in 1934. But they said the true death toll is probably much higher.
And I was just starting my career as a counselor working with very young children who were living in very abusive situations of living in crack houses, living with drug and alcohol abuse, and definitely living with emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. But sexual abuse especially was something nobody wanted to talk about. And so in the 80s, we had an incident in my school where there was a kindergarten bus. In those days, kindergarten was half a day. And so there was a class in the morning and a class in the afternoon. So there was a bus that just took kindergarten kids home at noon and picked up the new bunch, And there was a bus driver who was abusing children on the bus. And it finally came to light through a parent. A child had finally said something, and the parent came to school. And of course, the schools want to hush hush everything, And I was like, no, speak up, and they weren't real happy with me. But I started out by trying to educate teachers. Because so many of our teachers, a grand percentage of our teachers were white women who were at least middle class and above. And they were like, they didn't want to think about this issue, much less talk about it. And so it was very difficult to educate them about the incidents of sexual abuse of children and the signs to look for, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was working with kids, and kids were coming out more, and I was doing sexual abuse prevention classes, and also working with parents and doing presentations with parents, and trying to get the parents and the schools were like against each other because the schools were trying to hush it up, and the parents were like, something's happening to our children. We have to do something about this. So I was immersed in all of that, and it was big in the news. There was also a lot of news about cult activity and sexual abuse going on in different kinds of cults, etc. So it was a big issue and needed to happen. Needed to come out. Now there seems to be more of a movement to kind of cover it up again. But, that's how the pendulum goes back and forth. But I mean, I saw how the children who lived through it, how it affected them for the rest of their lives. It affected their sense of self, their relationships, just so many things. So it definitely needed to be dealt with. So that one stood out to me. And lately there have been so many reports, especially coming from Canada. And I believe the Canadian government finally apologized for the boarding school situation and the abuse that went on there and the deaths of so many children. Just hard to believe. And I think the United States needs to step up too and acknowledge and apologize and do something about it. Yeah.
Well, the 1980s for me was that I was placed into a situation of being able to do a lot of visiting of Native people. And also to begin to find out what I'm all about as a Native American. So people begin to look in my direction for more than just what they would get around Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was, for me personally, kind of opening up to the courage it takes now to dig into my heritage, because a lot of my circumstance uh, didn't allow for that opening to happen very much. But then I began to visit with the elders, and there was this 1978 Religious Freedom Act
Yes.
that made it possible for Native people to now step up and remember, but also to throw around a lot of guilt about church and national actions upon indigenous people. And I was also in a situation where I could visit with other people of other nations, and very similar actions were taken on the part of the nation as well as the church.
Mhm.
Uh, Whenever some of these things begin to be known, it was a bit of, hey, how do you handle that?
Yeah.
Because I felt like my choice was to bring more education and not to encourage more guilt on the part of the white man on the actions upon indigenous people. So I vacillated, I think it's the word, back and forth of how that the real is going to happen. And a lot of this information is my one of my choices was also that which came to light, even though that our father spoke rather limitedly about that. There was too much that distracted him from his contribution of music, music, music.
And
Yep.
you might add about your father had his own experience in boarding schools.
That's right. See,
Mhm.
and also that when he was 3 years old, his father died. And whenever he was 12, his mother also died due to alcohol kinds of things. And then, of course, his experience in the boarding school. So it got kind of, how am I going to get myself balanced and then bring an education to people who want the education instead of pausing it,
Yeah.
get away, as has been in the past. And what we're doing here is I think in some ways bringing the real, but also being able to say, is there something that needs not forgotten?
Mhm.
How can we somehow find a word is difficult, a blessing in disguise, as we find with with our personal. So yes, it was that came toward the end of the 1980s that I was a whole lot more. I was more prepared to have discussions, but the early part of the 80s, I certainly was not, because I was wanting to gather up information as much as I could.
You know, I'm going to add something to your 80s list right now. And
Oh.
that you and I met again in the 80s.
Oh,
And I think about 1984, maybe a little earlier. Wait a minute. No, 77, 78. I think we met in maybe 82 or 83. Yeah. I had to go by Noah's age. So, I mean, I knew you when you were going through all of this, and when you're doing your travels to visit with elders, etc. And at that time, you did your work with Irv Romans, correct?
yes. Oh, yes.
And received the Peace Shield. Yeah.
So, what a variety of things into our life
Yeah.
at time. And yet we can look back now and make a contribution to ourselves as well as to other people as we make this project happen. So that's the one subject. The next one that I'd like, at least I get to go first this time,
Okay.
is the Berlin Wall.
Mhm.
Unlike where you get news, and you're not really present for some of the things that we're talking about for the 80s, I was, I think, about my second visit to Berlin. I had already made some friends there. And as I came back, they had made preparations to take me to the east side of Germany through the wall or through the systems there. And somehow they felt like that was something that they wanted to share with me. But the year before, I had gone through the Berlin Museum.
Mm.
All the stories of the journeys from one side to another really kind of stirred inside of me because I thought of the journeys of our indigenous people from one condition to another.
Right.
You see, so that began to be kind of I found myself just really being those persons who tried to get to the other side or making tunnels or, hoping and wishing that somebody would finally make it across. So I think that second year, they realized that they would make a special happening. So we get in the car and we line up where the entrance would be to East Germany. I mean, you're looking at 35 or 40 cars all lined up and anticipating, the right to be able to go across. And they all turned off their motors and pushed the car instead of having to start the engine up. And okay, so here we are. Every 5 minutes or so, we'd push the car forward, and finally we do get through. And every small settlement towns, you had to go in and register who you are.
Wow.
Everything there to ensure that they knew who was coming and going, basically coming. And then I came to a nice farmhouse with really, really neat people who obviously had lots of stories of their East Germany heritage.
Mhm.
That I had known of this journey ahead of time, and so I took the sacred bundle
Oh.
because I wanted to have a prayer time in East Germany. And they just, when I think of this, I think about all the flowers that were set beneath every window. That was just their heritage.
Mhm.
It's a reminder that there's still yet beauty that can be appreciated
Mhm.
there. So I arranged that late in the night. Of course, you have time differences that kind of help you too. So it's something like 9 or 10 o'clock. I decided to have a prayer time. So I go out by myself and set a place there and got ready for the prayer time. And then I had company. That's a joke. Thousands of mosquitoes found. I mean, everywhere.
No.
Yeah, right. And what can you do with that? Because you're in their territory.
Yeah.
I went ahead with my quiet and prayer time, but obviously that experience stayed with me and still even today.
It was 30 years ago tonight, a night I will always remember when the Berlin Wall came down and thousands of East Germans poured across the border to be united with their fellow citizens. It was a process that led to the end of the Soviet Empire. Looking back, it's sometimes hard to believe it happened at all.
Good evening, live from the Berlin Wall on the most historic night in this wall's history.
Suddenly, the most forbidding symbol of the Cold War came tumbling down. No match for people who just wanted the chance to experience true freedom. We were here that week reporting on the growing protests against communist rule, and the hardliners were trying to come up with some kind of a plan that would ease the tension. Late that afternoon, the East German propaganda minister made a fateful mistake. He said those new rules allowing people to leave East Berlin would go into effect immediately.
It is possible for them to go through the wall at some point, presumably.
It is possible for them to go through the border.
But that wasn't the official plan. But it was too late.
The Berlin Wall can no longer contain the East German people.
They simply had had enough of a system of oppression that held them prisoner, trapped behind a wall in another world. The East German secret police, the Stasi, monitored every aspect of their lives.
Every one of these files is a citizen, is a human being.
In just this one area, 4 miles of files. Roland Jahn, a former East German dissident, maintains the archive to help people understand that dark past. He tells me we can use these records to be more sensitive about what democracy and basic human rights mean for all people. German Chancellor Angela Merkel grew up in East Germany. At the Wall Memorial today, she honored those who lost their lives trying to escape. But for many East Germans, even the passing of 30 years hasn't entirely erased the sense of sudden dislocation.
All of a sudden, people realize for West Germans, nothing has really changed except it's a bigger country. But for East German people, everything has changed. Every single thing in life has changed.
Far-right political parties now are playing on that feeling of loss, as they have around the globe. But tonight, a time to celebrate and marvel at the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, now as then.
It's a night to remember.
So, Jose, 30 years later, there is a united Germany, but problems still exist not just for this country, but for the rest of the world, because what we did not know that night is that what was to come, 9/11 and the wars in the Middle East that go on to this day.
There must be something about you and mosquito, because you had a similar experience in Finland.
Yes, that's right. Yes, well, there's probably some reason that we don't give credit to the tiniest of things. We think eagles and bears, and that's right.
The mosquito story is one of my favorites.
But as you know, the story is not yet complete. So I finished that. The next, I think it was 2 days later, the trip back through the security place was to take place. And before leaving there, this fine, and I can see his face, this East Germany man had such a light step, and he had something in his hands. It was a neat knife and sheath that he had personally made, about so big.
Wow.
Okay. And he gave that to me, and I put it in the suitcase, not really thinking that it might be inspected like it was inspected coming. Everything got inspected. Whenever you come into East Germany, open up everything, all the suitcases, all the checking out the car and everything. And so I received the gift, not thinking very much until we get in line to leave through the guard system. And then I began to, very seldom do I get nervous. Okay, yeah, what are they going to think when they find that weapon thing. So get there, and the guys are around all over the place. And for some reason, they did not open up the suitcase.
Whoa.
Uh-huh.
You know, something our kids and grandkids may not fully realize in listening to this story is that in those days, we're used to that now. I mean, they go through our luggage and they x-ray everything and they ask you questions. And ever since 9/11, that has been our life. But this was before 9/11. Mm-hmm. And before 9/11, I mean, you could go right up to the plane with your family and see them off. And there were no checkpoints. There were no check your luggage or any of that stuff. It was very free and easy, but not in East Berlin.
No.
So, yeah. But that was like, whoa, really different than our usual American experience. Yeah.
Well, we got out. And then I decided to go to the wall personally because I had offered prayers on one side of the door of the wall, and I wanted to offer a little bit of put the tobacco down and have a little time on the west side of the wall, which I did. Then it was time to head for the States, and about 2 months later that same year, 1989, I believe. The wall came down.
Wow.
Now, I have to be careful saying these things because some people think I'm so, I'm a medicine man and I did something that caused. No, it was just another prayer in behalf of the concern there.
And the timing. Yeah.
And the timing.
Yeah. So
whenever all of the news presented the events of that time, I could almost, not really, I could almost recognize where I stood, but it was such a joy. And then I think some months later, one of my friends, I miss those people, sent me a part of the wall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's something different than what we're doing with our project here, is that sometimes we are in the middle of the event.
Right.
Because we are reacting to what is being news brought to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a personal connection.
That's right. Well, we're going to take on one more subject since I think that this is going to be fun, and that is that as we get a little personal, one of the events that I really was drawn to was when President Reagan had that United Nations talk.
Right.
Okay. Now, for a lot of people, it was just another one of those things that wouldn't have a whole lot of depth to it. But my connection with that, what if there were, and you probably have a command of the speech, something about aliens. Okay.
It was kind of, what if there was a common enemy that came, and wouldn't that unite us all to, fight against that common enemy from wherever that enemy might come? And I remember when I heard the speech, I was like, is he really talking about what I think he's really talking about?
Yeah.
Wow, this is awesome, and I think he was. Pardon me?
The last part of that was a suggestion, at least that's how I picked it up.
Yep.
That maybe we're already in the presence of aliens.
Yes, he knew things. And he was one of the few presidents, I think, who did know things, because there was time where it was like, well, after this, we're not briefing the president anymore about this. But yeah, and that's when a lot of space defense began, Star Wars and all that stuff. Yeah.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
Well, I have some of President Reagan's diary or writings, where he suggested also, and went a little further with some high schoolers. Okay. So there was a number of those kinds of suggestions that was just beginning to possibly open up the door to what I feel like is going to be another one of our projects. I'm just suggesting that there's probably another kind of history that is now beginning to kind of make its presence known.
Agreed.
I wanted to make that suggestion because 2 days ago, they had the second hearing, and you're recognizing what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
Those who are opening up the stories of what has been kept from the public, and I say rightfully so, because the public wasn't really spiritually ready for the bigger picture, I call it. And yet that is a real turn in the road, I call it, for this subject of there's more to life than we thought.
Have you heard any news about what was discussed at that? Because I haven't heard anything.
I have it taped.
Oh.
Yes. And it's one of those things that I just happened to be finishing up, getting ready for Thursday's class, and was flipping through the channel. Oh, there it is.
There it is.
Wow. And I caught it at the very beginning where the panel was ready, and the guys came, and I set up my cell phone, and it was 2 hours long.
Wow.
And it's a wow. So I have that ready to be put together.
Capitol Hill today, as we just said, the bipartisan push for transparency, certainly decades in the making. The nation watched gripping testimony of UAPs, accusations of a government cover-up, calls for action, and demands for greater transparency on this issue. What are these unidentified objects? Where did they come from? And are we alone? Take a listen. Here are some of the key highlights from that hearing.
Finally, I'd like to thank these three brave witnesses here. They took an oath. They took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and dadgummit, they're doing it. And we owe them a debt of gratitude.
I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me. Today, I would like to highlight three critical issues that demand our action. As we convene here, UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena. The stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security. It silences commercial pilots who fear professional repercussions, discourages witnesses, and is only compounded by recent government claims questioning the credibility of eyewitness testimony. Parts of our government are aware of more about UAP than they let on, but excessive classification practices keep crucial information hidden. Since 2021, all UAP videos are classified as secret or above. This level of secrecy not only impedes our understanding, but fuels speculation and mistrust.
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it. I made the decision, based on the data I collected, to report this information to my superiors and multiple inspectors general, and in effect becoming a whistleblower. As you know, I've suffered retaliation for my decision, but I am hopeful that my actions will ultimately lead to a positive outcome of increased transparency.
This is serious. It's been serious for a long time, and it's been ignored for way too long.
The biggest danger is not allowing the public to know. The biggest danger is secrecy, not transparency.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely.
Would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
No.
The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had.
We're going to start talking to people. We're going to start naming names.
Now it's on the front burner, and it's about time.
The dam has broke and it is overflowing.
What I personally witnessed was very disturbing.
Someone can reach through the veil of government and pierce it to the point of we do not have access to something. You've got to start asking yourself who the hell's in control.
Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured and concealed these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Good evening, I'm Brian Enton. Welcome to our special report. A historic congressional hearing drew lines of spectators to the nation's capital, where under oath, 3 witnesses told lawmakers and the world, we are not alone and our government has proof. Remember, this all started with Pentagon whistleblower David Grush, who sat down with investigative journalist Ross Coulthart for an exclusive interview with News Nation. He alleged the U.S. government has a secret crash retrieval program and claims it is in possession of UFOs, even bodies of dead pilots. David Grush sat before a House Oversight Committee this week alongside former Navy pilot Ryan Graves and Black Aces Squadron Commander David Fravor, both who say they saw something not of this world. You are going to hear their testimony tonight, along with some new major developments that have come out since that hearing. What Russia knows about UFOs and reports Russian warplanes have actually engaged with UFOs. Whether you believe it's UFOs or something else, it seems like there is something out there that top government leaders do not want us to know, something that is being hidden. So let's start with that allegation of a cover-up deep inside our own government and the stunning moment when David Grush reveals to Congress just how high the stakes are.
Thank you for being here, brother. Thank you all very much. Have you faced any retaliation or reprisals for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Maybe in a if we could get in a confidential area, SCIF, we could talk about that. But unfortunately, we were denied access to the SCIF, and that's very unfortunate in this scenario.
You heard Representative Tim Burchett just reference a SCIF. You're going to hear that word a lot tonight. It refers to a sensitive, compartmentalized information facility, essentially an ultra-secure room for government contractors and officials to review some of the nation's most sensitive and classified documents and information. This is all to protect our national security, which was also a top concern from this week's witnesses, especially when it comes to technology associated with UFOs.
This is for any one of you. Based off of each of your experiences and observations, do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
I'll do it. Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. If you had one, you captured one, you reverse engineered it, you got it to work, you're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave, and there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Okay. You two?
Well, I would also like to add, from a commercial aviation and military aviation perspective, we deal with uncertainty in our operating space as a matter of our professional actions. Identifying friend from foe is very important to us. And so when we have unidentified targets and we continue to ignore those due to a stigma or a fear of what it could be, that's an opening that our adversaries can take advantage of.
Mr. Grush, in your complaint to the intelligence community inspector general, you claim that you believe information is being hidden. What kind of information do you think was hidden, and do you think it should remain hidden?
Yes, I can speak to that very briefly in an unclassified manner. As you know, the preponderance of my complaint was classified to the intelligence communities. Both material acquisition and exploitation activity, also baselining the UAPs but not sharing it with, intelligence professionals that are actually doing step briefs to pilots, that kind of information.
So why do these pilots, Ryan Graves and David Fravor, say they believe what they saw in the skies were not of this earth? Here is exactly what they said under oath.
Mr. Graves, again, I'd like to know, how do you know that these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's zero airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Okay. Have you spoken to commercial and military pilots that have seen these off of our East Coast?
I have.
Okay. Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Okay.
Bodies. Do we have species of
Well, naturally, when you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
That was definitely one of the most shocking claims made by Pentagon whistleblower David Grush during his exclusive interview with investigative journalist Ross Coulthart right here on News Nation. But first, Congresswoman Nancy Mace presses for more information about what military pilots Ryan Graves and David Fravor say they encountered. And she pushes David Grush on his claim about dead pilots, where he shares even more detail.
And then do you believe there's an active disinformation campaign within our government to deny existence of UAPs, yes or no?
As previously stated publicly, yes.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Anyway, that is just a little introduction to perhaps, maybe, there could be a journey of another kind of history that some people are, I think, ready to know about and to process and to see how that we are in a special time when more is going to be available, even though there is, you've heard me use this example, whenever there is a squelching of information, it's only a matter of time that information is going to come back and out and more.
Exactly. Just like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. And eventually it comes back up with a pretty explosive splash.
Well, and my looking down the road is that as this information begins to be revealed, then there needs to be some helping people along the way.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the things that I feel like is a part of my journey. To have the information, present it well, kind of diminish the tendency to look at what we did to you people kind of thing, again, concept, and to say that we are opening the door to a repeating cyclical time, that Mother Earth is, and the people are, some of the people are ready for the bigger picture to happen.
And to minimize the fear.
Yes.